Thanks again, Steve, for the chance to present today. The topic is gender equality in the home, and our presentation is divided into two parts. Candace is going to go first. I'm going to share the screen, the slides that she has prepared.
You don't have to bring the slide up quite yet.
Okay. Just tell me when you're ready.
Okay, I will. So I want to speak a little bit to the genesis of our presentation today, or our conversation today. Dan found a really interesting article and sent it to me. And I was able to go in and find the recommended articles related to his article, with the exception of one that I'll be presenting. And so that's kind of where we came, how we came to this place. And we thought that this week we would do something a little bit different than we did last week. Last week we had a really great, honest dialogue, and we'd like to continue, of course, to hear from the men in our group about the matters that we're going to discuss today. We don't all have to be, we don't all have to agree, but it's great if everybody could be heard. And if you feel, as I got a message from one, if you feel a little hesitant, because I know some of the women in the group are strong, you can say for a friend, you can say, oh, I was just wondering about, or one of my friends thinks, or something like that. And that's fine if you feel uncomfortable for any reason. So I have 3 articles that I'd like to share with you today. Not that they are the end all or be all, but it's a good representation of some of the issues that may be happening in our homes or the homes of our children or people that we know. One has to do with the millennial male perspective on female accomplishments. Another is about the correlation between men helping with household and female household income. And in the spirit of looking at the other side, the final articles from a Fox News contributor about how females may be demasculating men, leading them to overtly or covertly respond to some of the women's issues. So Dan, you can put up the millennial slide. Should be the first one. Awesome, thank you. So last week, it was Roy's daughter, I guess I can say that, I didn't know if she'd be here today, shared a situation where she was surprised by her son's question about a female political leader, and that leader's, he thought, somewhat aggressive personality. And for those of you that might be here that weren't here last week, her son had questioned this female leader and thought she might be a little bit too much. But when mom said, well, what do you think about an unnamed male leader, he didn't really respond to that, and thought maybe the female should be a little bit softer. And I, as a mom, even though my children are in their 40s now, I could so relate to that. And it really made me think about how deeply and unconsciously embedded some of our beliefs are. I had a male friend, progressive Democrat like myself, who also suggested that one of the female presidential candidates should take it down a notch. When I questioned him about this, he said, because the female candidate had said almost exactly what the male candidate said. And when I questioned him about that, he said it was her tone and her body language, which is probably not something a male should be saying to me. So that really hit home, that even individuals who think of themselves as being progressive might have something going on underneath that's a bias or cognitive rigidity relative to some of our beliefs about the roles of women. So our US millennial men just as sexist as their dads. So last week we touched on this, and I think all of us kind of thought that the younger generation has come quite a way and might not feel the same way that some older individuals do. So I was very surprised to find out that that might not be the case. So the National Institute of Health published a study on how college students view their classmates' intelligence and their achievements. And the researchers found that male students systematically overestimated the knowledge of the men in their classes compared to the females. Even as the academic term progressed, and it was clear that the females had superior class performance and better grades, their beliefs dug in, and it was even more significant. In contrast, female students surveyed did not show bias accurately evaluating the fellow students' performance. So I thought that was really interesting. We've talked a lot about cognitive bias and how we dig into what we believe in. And I think this is a primary case of that. Another very small, well, maybe I shouldn't say very small, another component to it that I thought was interesting was we used to believe that objectivity was more of a masculine trait. And I'm just not so sure that that is necessarily the case, that maybe we both are equally able to be objective in our assessment. So I thought that part was interesting. A Harris poll found that young men were less open to accepting women leaders than older men were, and only 41% of millennial men were comfortable with women engineers, compared to 65% of men 65 and older. Likewise, 43% of the millennial men were comfortable with women being US senators, compared to 64% of Americans overall. They did believe that they found what they characterized as a glimmer of hope when they found that millennial men were more likely than the Gen X and Boomer men to predict that their wives would have equal careers and less likely to do the majority of childcare. There was, however, additional research conducted just on that one construct that led them to believe that there might be some problems in paradise later on, because 3/4 of the millennial women anticipate that their careers would be at least as important as their partners, but only half of the men in their generation expect that their own careers will take priority. So we have a statistical gap there. The gap was similar when it came to childcare responsibilities. Half of the millennial women believe that they would handle most of the childcare, but 2/3 of their male peers believe their wives would do so. So we have, for childcare, half of the women thinking they would do half, but their male counterparts think that 2/3 of them will be doing it. So we have a discrepancy there. So important that people talk about that. The next slide. Emasculated men refuse to do chores except cooking. So just to be clear, when we use the verbs demasculate, it means to remove the masculinity from somebody. Not quite sure how you do that, but I am going to give you an example. Whereas emasculate means that you deprive them of virility. So we have demasculate and emasculate. So as examples, well, maybe it was me, maybe it was a friend. I took a position suddenly taking more money than my husband at the time. And at the same time, I also learned how to use household tools, and I learned how to mow the lawn. Some people would call that demasculation. Several men, so it's probably true, have commented that I don't always offer or generate what they term caveman moments for them, which, if I understood correctly, means kind of artificially creating a moment which they feel masculine. So me not providing those caveman moments might be considered emasculating. Now I'll go ahead and share that article. So it states that everybody's feeling anxious and uncertain. People have lost jobs, more women on college campuses, women making more money, owning their own homes, electing to stay single. And just as a side note, there's some really good research on electing to stay single because, interesting enough, many men don't believe the research that there are some women who want to remain single. So that's kind of an interesting phenomena. So the author believes that this may be rightly or wrongly disrupting the social hierarchy, and even stated that some men may be responding to their slipping place in the social hierarchy by supporting, let's say, some more conservative political individuals. So for them, it might be a way to balance out the power in the household. The study found that when the wife earns more than the husband does less housework and childcare than he otherwise would have if he earned more. Furthermore, the greater the income disparity, women earning more, the less housework and childcare the husband did. They accounted for this behavior as saying, she might earn all the money, but I'm not going to do the dishes. So it appears that the behavior might be kind of a balancing of masculinity. The only exception to this was cooking. And why? Because cooking was rated as a leisurely activity as opposed to a chore. So that didn't really enter into housework or childcare or anything like that. Also, probably expectedly, men were also especially more likely to avoid housework when they believe the woman would pick up the slack, which is probably our own possible contribution to the problem. So the idea of balancing power in relationships reminded me of several articles. It's probably been 5 or 6 years since I read those, but it's about the economics of relationship and not the financial economics. It is a theory that's exceedingly non-romantic. It's very pragmatic, so it's not for everybody. But the theory very basically states that we all bring both positive and negative characteristics to the relationship table, like gambling chips. So it might be money, education, looks, intelligence, assets, a caring attitude. So what you're bringing is not important. It's the weight that's assigned to it, and the table is staying steady. So as an example, if Dan and I had a relationship table, and I'm only picking on him because it's kind of his form, and let's say he brings all the looks to the table, and I bring the money, the education, intelligence, the assets, and let's say our table is balanced. If he starts losing looks, we become unbalanced, and he's got to pick up in other ways to rebalance. And that's why I say it's a relatively pragmatic look at the balance of power in relationships. That's an oversimplification, but I think you probably get the idea. So in the study on housework, the man is emasculated by earning less than his wife, so he remasculates himself or balances that table by not doing housework or chores. So the last slide is fun. So I didn't really know what was out there from the other side relative to women demasculating or emasculating men, and what the thoughts were, particularly after we talked about political party male female last week. So that's still been kind of ruminating in my mind. So I needed to go to the other side to get a better perspective on what's out there. So I find Susan Venker. So Susan has a very short 2-sentence bio. And here's what she says about herself. So you have a little bit of background. I'm the author of 5 books and a columnist and contributor for various publications. It is said that my 2012 article for Fox News titled "The War on Men" remains one of their most read op-eds in history, and that I've made appearances on Tucker Carlson Tonight, and I don't know who he is, but I think he's the guy that walked off, as well as on The View. And then she states there were lots of other accolades too. Okay. So she also has a podcast and she coaches men. So men can sign up to get personal coaching with her. And apparently quite a few men do that. So Susan begins by offering that females have absorbed what she recalls to what she characterizes, as a steady drip of girl power since the day they were born, and the result is the emasculation of men. Therefore, men have been systematically feminized by women for decades, which she thinks is bad, and this is how that has happened. She believes women have, she and many others, believe that women have been groomed to believe that men and society owe them. As a result, women either knowingly or unknowingly pull rank in their relationships, which makes the relationship, her word, hugely imbalanced, which I'm sure put a smile on some of your faces. She also states that we in the West encourage women and girls to put ourselves first at all times, as though we are superior to men. We consistently put women's needs, desires, and rights above men's needs. The notion that men even have rights eludes us. Other contributing factors, the rise of single motherhood and father-absent homes. These are things that she believes, not me. The feminist movement, which insists men are unnecessary or even harmful to women. The introduction of the new age sensitive guy who's presumably superior to the macho man. And all of these 20th century events and ideas have led to the rise of soft males. Despite what the culture teaches you, her advice is to men, you matter just as much as women do, and don't allow the equality narrative to tell you otherwise. She also states that at the end of the day, in any marriage or relationship, there is almost always one personality that's stronger than the other. And in the 21st century, it's far more common for that individual to be the woman. And men can respond in one of 2 ways. They can roll over or they can stand tall. So in conclusion, my only hope is that we at least question the gains we have made in the perspectives of the female role with the younger generation. I'm not convinced that we have made the progress that perhaps we thought. And I am optimistically hopeful that the men in our lives will step up to that plate and be role models for their children and to stand for us when we need that. I also hope that we better understand, or at least question, the power table in our own relationships, and that we understand the concept of emasculation and demasculation, whether we believe it or not. At least we know what that is, and that's out there. We're going to continue to hear about it. And also that we're just a little bit more knowledgeable about what's out there regarding advice for men relative to women's issues. So this is just kind of a taster, gives you an idea of what's out there, people are thinking, what the research is showing. And I'll turn it over to Dan now, who actually has the primary article to go through, and then we can open it up. Dan, you're on.
Great, thanks, Candace. I'm going to go through some other points through the articles. Some of them touch upon the items that Candace just presented, but these are going to be, as you can see, with Candace's material already as a starter, we've got lots of interesting questions to consider, and and also the things that we can discuss in the Q&A session. But the outline that I have is really these items that you see on the screen. First, in terms of professional careers, we can ask the questions like, as women gain more professional careers in society than they had in previous generations, how are men and women going to view this change? And while this is happening in the USA, for example, we can also think about what are women experiencing in foreign countries. It's not really what I expected. I know when I looked through the research, I thought some countries might have more traditional views than the USA, but one article talked about how Spanish and French women spent much less time on household work than American women. The second part is earnings. This is another item from one of the articles, is that the earnings increase for both men and women. They feel that they can do less around the household, as Candace talked about. And the exception is that some husbands are resorting to cooking, and they like cooking even more. I think this is also a particular interest. Now that we're in a pandemic era, I've heard that many households, independent of who's cooking, that there is more cooking going on. People are just paying more attention to how they prepare their meals because they are at home more often. And these articles that we've reviewed have research going back to 2016. So now that we're, now that the pandemic has happened in 2020, that's a little bit of a shift there. The third item on my list is gender equality. Women in increasing numbers are getting more college degrees, of course, and entering fields like law and medicine, which were mostly men before. And yet women may still take on the bulk of household chores because they feel that it's necessary to do it. So how can we change that bias, not just in the way men look at it, but in the way that women look at it? That's that bias, as we know from psychology and from philosophy, sometimes those biases are difficult to alter or to drop. And finally, young adults. Our culture tells us that the millennials, who are now maybe 20 to 40 years old, they inherently believe in gender equality, but is that true? And if so, why hasn't our society changed faster with their input? Well, one of the studies, or one of the thoughts from the articles, is that we may have to wait for millennials to age more and gain more economic and political power so that that can take effect basically in society. So that truth is a little bit harder to accept. And there have been several surveys, as Candace referred to, that show that young men undervalued the intelligence and leadership of women. So that's going to be another interesting area.